Frank, it's a delight to meet with you, and as it were, pick up this great link with the trust, and also, of course, through that with Crown Woods Academy. But there are a number of places where we cross over, as it were. So as we chat, then we'll pick those up. But are you a Sussex man by birth?
No, not originally. I'm a man of Kent. I was born east of the Medway, as opposed to a Kentish man who's born west of the Medway. So I'm a man of Kent. I was born in Goudhurst.
Oh yes, that's a lovely place. Yeah.
Lovely village, yes.
Yeah. Indeed, I've sort of led an ecumenical evening with my great friend Kevin MacDonald, who was the Archbishop of Southwark, I think, for a bit.
Right.
Had to retire early because he was unwell. So when did you move out of Kent then?
When I was sent off to boarding school.
Where were you sent?
I was sent to Beaumont College originally with the Jesuits, and then when they closed Beaumont College, they sent me up to Stonyhurst for my sixth form in Lancashire.
In Lancashire,
in the Fells by Longbridge Fell.
Yes. And then from there, you went to you went off to college at Imperial in London. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Yes. And you read science?
I read metallurgical engineering or metallurgy.
Right. Yes.
Which is science and engineering, both of those.
Yes.
Chemistry, physics, and engineering. Because I liked all of those things.
But you then went on to Westminster College. Now, which one is that? The one in Oxford or the one in London?
Yes, it's in Oxford. Yes, that's right.
And that was what, to finish your
well, that was to do the teacher. That was to do the teacher training, because after I finished university, my father was very ill, and I helped nurse him for a few months. And then decided to think, what might I do next, rather than going straight into engineering, because let's say some of the work experience placements hadn't enamored me to the culture of some of the people, which I won't go into further. So I decided to look at maybe teaching, because a friend had done it, and one of my sisters as well. So I thought, well, I'll have a look at that. And so I went to Westminster College and did the teacher qualification there.
Well, I'm sure an awfully large number of people will be giving great thanks that you made that decision, because you've contributed a huge amount in so many different aspects of education. And then, where was your first job then?
My first full-time teaching job, because after my father died, I did a couple of terms as a supply teacher in a boys' secondary modern school in Orpington. No longer exists now, and that was what sort of switched me on to wanting to be a teacher, because they said I was very good and I ought to stay in it, and so I went and got trained. But my first full-time job was in Devizes in Wiltshire, where I met my wife, and we started our family when we were there for those 5 years.
And Kate, is Kate a teacher too?
Yes, she is, languages. She was trained as that and was a languages teacher for some years before going into languages curriculum development for the department.
And you have 3 boys. Well, they'll be men by now, of course.
They are
all
men.
Teachers too?
Sorry?
Teachers too?
No, none of them are teachers. None of the 3, having had 2 parents.
Right.
I mean, all 3 of them were taught French by their mother, and 2 of them chose to do it with her for A-level. I said they were being sort of masochists in doing that.
Very loyal though. And then
they were very loyal. They were very loyal indeed. Yeah.
But Devizes is a nice place to have started, I'd have thought.
Oh, it's a lovely town.
Yeah.
I've recently, because we by coincidence happened to meet one of the colleagues I worked with there all those years ago, and he lives down in Littlehampton now, near me, and actually he was the guy I was playing golf with today, and we both been saying what a wonderful town it was, and how marvellously lucky we were to have that job to start with at that school, at Devizes School. It was terrific. It was great, really great fun, and you didn't know until you got somewhere else just how good it was.
And then, how long was it before you got to Cardinal Newman?
I did a 2.5 years in a school in Reading, and then became head of science at Cardinal Newman School in 1981.
And then deputy head.
And then moved on there as deputy head. So I was 11 years at Cardinal Newman School, and both as a head of science and deputy. Yeah.
And by now we're well into the south coast, aren't we? We're in Hove.
Oh, yes, so that's what it's working. We lived in Shoreham then in 81, and we've now had sort of 30 out of the last 38, 39 years here in Shoreham, and it's very much a homely place, and we love it here, and we'll probably spend the rest of our days here, I suspect.
But at the same time, did you had a spell out in Lincoln?
Yes, there was. That was to get my first headship. I took on I was asked to be head of a school that was starting. So my first headship was a brand new school, which meant that you had a sort of a blank canvas, and that was. I was very surprised to get it, and because you've never been a head before, and if you're going to run a school you've never run a school before, you don't really know how to set it up from nothing, because none of your training or preparation has ever said start a school from nothing, appoint the staff. Well, how are you going to do this? What are you going to do first? What are you going to do second? How are you going to build it? Normally, as a head, you take over a school that's in existence, and all you do is just change it around a bit and modify it. But it's a creative process, and I do remember on more than one occasion when one of my staff were going to say, "What are we going to do? We haven't got any procedure for doing this, or how are we going to do this? We haven't done it before." And at the end of it, once, twice, I said, "Look, I'm out of creative ideas today. Come back tomorrow." But that was just.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you said, being suddenly offered this sort of blank sheet on one level, you think, wow, that's the most marvelous thing. But another level, you think, oh my goodness me, where do I start?
Yes.
So yeah, that's really, and that was in Lincoln City itself, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, on the southern edge of the city. Yeah.
Which as a city, I spent 5 years in myself, 5 or 6 years, and loved dearly. It's I always think the cathedral there is probably the most powerfully situated cathedral in England, on the top of that cliff, isn't it?
Right on the top of Steep Hill, and on the ridge, the Lincoln Ridge, and it looks both ways. Oh yes, and that street, the main street going up to Steep Hill from Brayford Pool, is marvellous. My deputy head I appointed, who was a historian, said it's the only street in Britain and possibly Europe which has got houses which have been occupied ever since the 1st century AD. And there's first, second, you can go all the way through as you go up Steep Hill there, and the enormous, wonderful street it is.
Indeed, and at the top you can, as you say, I mean, not only is the Roman, but you then see, very unusually in England, Norman houses.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Most unusual, yes. Yeah. Oh, it's a wonderful city, and we loved it. In our day, it was everyone used to say, oh, I'm so sorry you're going to Lincoln. It's so far away from everywhere. But actually, because it wasn't really, it's not far from the A1 and not far from the main line.
No.
But now, of course, as I was hinting when we chatting earlier, the Brayford Pool, which in those days was really broken down factories and empty railway sidings, now looks like the French Riviera.
I know it's been massively changed since the arrival of the university in 1996, I think it was, or 95. I think the university opened. Yes, it's quite amazing, really.
Amazing.
The transformation down there is quite remarkable.
And now that was the sort of what's the word? The sort of the springboard for you, Lincoln, to come down to around the Leigh Academy in Dartford. Is that right?
Yeah. It is, yes, one of the original city technology colleges, one of the original ones of those. Yes, and because I have to say the family were not enamoured of moving to what they considered the far north, having been brought up on the south coast. Lincoln was a long way away and very far north, and so they pestered me to consider moving, and And then this great opportunity came to take on the Lincoln School, to take on the Leigh City Technology College, as it was at the time, which is one of the original 15 CTCs with that commitment to technology. And as you can see from Lincoln was also a technology and science place. And
yeah.
That's, having had that background originally and having been a science teacher, I wanted to try and really push the value and importance of science and technology in the curriculum. I've been a great supporter of that all the way through my career, to try and push it as much as possible.
Well, you must tell your family that, in my view, when you live in Berwick-upon-Tweed, Lincoln, I would see as undoubtedly equatorial.
I know, it was to be on the south coast.
Anyway, was Leigh a new school, or was it taking over an old?
Well, it had been established as in 1990, about 7 years before, and had struggled to overcome the previous school that had been in some difficulties. And so it wasn't that successful at the time. And part of the job was to turn it round and give it a better reputation. That's part of the reason I wanted to do it, because it had the name technology in its title. And as far as I was concerned, I didn't want any school that had the name technology in its title to be anything other than successful, and to get that title to mean something that is successful. In the same kind of way that, if you say something's called a grammar school, it has a statement of being very good academically. And a technology school or technology college should be something that does science and construction and manufacturing and design really well as part of its curriculum, and people should see it that way.
And you spent 11 years there, was that right?
About 13 years in Dartford.
13 years, right.
Yeah. Firstly, because it was, when it became the City Technology College, the buildings had been a boys and a girls schools on each side of the road, which were made into a comprehensive. They had money thrown at them, but because it was very old buildings, it had kind of not really done the change to the buildings that was needed. So first of all, we had to turn the school round. The second stage, we had to get it rebuilt, which is what the second stage of that job was, and having a new building put up. And so that happened in 2005-06, and then a number of us persuaded one of the ministers then, Lord Adonis, that if we could make schools successful, why couldn't we take on other schools that weren't doing so well and make groups of schools, which are now called multi-academy trusts? And we persuaded Lord Adonis. I can remember one cold January day when he said, yes, I suppose you do need a new building. And the deal was, if we had a new building, he would allow us and wanted us to take on at least one failing school. And that was how the Leigh Academies Trust started and became a multi-academy trust, and was one of the very first. And now, of course, it's now 28, 29 schools strong, and Crown Woods is one of that group.
That's a marvellous story, really. And so where you finished your time at the Leigh Academy, in which year was that?
2013 I finished.
And is that when you became Chief Executive?
Yeah, that's when I became Chief Executive of the Trust in 2008, when we went from a single school to a group of schools. So the title effectively changed, because you were no longer a head teacher anymore. Once you got beyond 3 schools, and that was 2009, it became a Chief Executive function, which is what Simon's role is now, Simon Beamish's role at the Leigh Academies Trust. He's Chief Executive of a group of schools, in the same way that in the days of them being local authority schools, he'd have been the Chief Education Officer under those titles, running all the schools in the authority. But now it's in a group of schools under the charitable company structure of Academy Trusts.
And congratulations, because it was at the end of that time that you were awarded the honour of the CBE, which is,
I was, yes,
that's really quite a thing.
Yes,
and then you were the first, you were the National Schools Commissioner after that.
I was, yes.
Could you just tell us a little bit what that means?
What it means is that the person who's the National Schools Commissioner, their role is an oversight of all the academies and free schools in the country. So that's primary, secondary, and the multi-academy trusts, because what they were realizing at that point was that having set up a range of academies and a number of multi-academy trusts, they had so many different contracts and arrangements. They wanted some kind of coordination over it. Otherwise, the school system was getting, the thousand flowers blooming. There were too many weeds growing up in the garden, and they wanted somebody at a national level to help sort that out. So they'd had a commissioner before, but this time the role was restructured in the sense that then we created regional commissioners as well. So you've got regional school commissioners. So and the regions then work in that way to keep an eye on the academies and the multi-academy trusts in the regions. And the National Commission, in a sense, deals with those regional commissioners as well as the schools, but it's about getting the right direction and improving schools as much as possible, and getting the message and the policy and the procedures that academies and academy trusts would find the best way to improve outcomes and lives for children.
And I noticed one more thing, which I was going to ask you about. The shoreline. What's the shoreline enterprise?
It's now, since I've given up being full-time employed by anybody, I do a little bit of consultancy, of educational consultancy, advice, guidance, mentoring, training, lecturing, as a sideline to earn a little bit more money. But
and when did you become a freeman of the company?
That was fairly 2017, I think it was, after I'd finished as commissioner. I was invited to join the livery company, because one of the last things that I did as in setting up the Academy Trust, one of the things I'd seen already was that a number of the livery companies had long-standing links with education, and I don't mean 20, 30 years, I mean 200, 300, 400 years. And if the Academy Trust model was to survive, it needed a number of key trusts to get links with long-established organizations like the livery companies. And I spent 2 or 3 years looking at which ones might work. And because Bob Finlay, who was our chairman, had a number of friends who were stationers, I don't think he was a freeman at that time, and he said, well, they were looking to get a new secondary school, having lost their one in Hornsey 20 years before. Could I help? Or 30 years before. So I did, and I helped to find them one, and that's where Crown Woods has come as the Stationers Academy Crown Woods. And that's when the Stationers, in a sense, became a sponsor of Leigh Academies Trust. And that link for me is a fundamental part of the strength in the trust, that it has this link with a long-established organisation that sees the world not just in 3 years, 1 year or 5 years, but in 50 years, 100 years. And I think that's really important for the thinking in the trust, that it has that sort of link with the livery company.
Well, I have to say, it's been a really significant thing for the company, and for me personally, it was a real delight when we embraced the notion of opening or at least sponsoring another school.
Yeah,
I'd been at the Stationers Company School myself, and was much saddened when things conspired to close the previous school. So I was a great enthusiast for this happening, and it's been marvellous. And it's just one part of a really significant emphasis that the company has invested in education alongside apprenticeships and so on.
That's right.
So I mean, we're really grateful for all that you've done, and you're part of this. And what if I said to you, well, what one thing would you like to see coming out of your link with the Stationers Company? How would you answer that? What particularly do you think, having now been a member for 3 years?
for me, the best link would be for the stations to take on a second and even a third school within the Leigh Academies Trust, and whether it's in London or whether it's in Kent or whether it's helping the trust to establish a link further afield. But I think to build on it from what it already has would be the ideal from my point of view.
That's a wonderful aspiration on which to finish this really good conversation, Frank. We'll have to work together in the next few years to see if we can achieve that.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Master. Enjoyable discussion.